Lanterns after the storm. The first time I died, nothing about it looked poetic. No thunder split the sky. No one called my name in slow motion. I was simply standing in the glass ballroom of Halcyon Academy, watching a drone paint blue routes across the ceiling and realizing that the light above everyone's heads belonged to me while the credit on stage never would. The project was called City Vane. It had started with me sitting on damp subway stairs, interviewing cleaners, street vendors, and night bus drivers about the routes they used when floodwaters swallowed the usual roads. I built the first model in a notebook that smelled like graphite and cinnamon tea. I wrote the pathfinding code. I logged the failures. I walked 3 districts in old sneakers to test every ugly draft. Rowan Vale made it beautiful. That was the arrangement in our team, and though I had been too in love to name it properly, in our relationship too, I built the bones. Rowan polished them until adults in expensive clothes called them vision. At the Founders Gala, under chandeliers and sponsor banners, the host smiled toward the cameras and asked who had inspired this year's top capstone team. The answer should have been easy. Rowan smiled the smile that had once made me forgive anything. 2 people, he said. First, the sponsors who believed in impossible work. Applause. Second, he continued, turning toward Celeste Wren. The person who taught me that intelligence means nothing if it can't become elegance. Then he took her hand. The ballroom flashed white. With cameras. And my partner, he said, in this project, and I hope in every plan after tonight. Everyone loved it. Students clapped. Sponsors smiled. Teachers looked relieved that youth had given them a polished story instead of a complicated truth. Above the stage, the drone kept tracing my algorithm. In clean blue arcs, my phone vibrated on the dessert table. Mina, Leora, Mina, tell me this is fake. Mina, please do not disappear. I put the phone face down because I could not bear kindness. Then, just when the room had settled into its chosen version of events, a voice from the sponsors table cut through the applause. Maybe, it said, calm and low. You should ask who. Built it before asking who gets to pose beside it. The room turned. Theo Mercer sat 3 seats away from the headmaster, tie crooked, dark hair falling across one eye, expression flat enough to be mistaken for boredom if you did not know how to read fury. Theo rarely attended formal events unless dragged there by the astronomy department or by public duty. Too large to refuse, he was brilliant in the inconvenient, hard to package way that made adults admire him while wishing he came with softer edges. The host blinked. Mr. Mercer, Theo accepted a microphone only after a board member pushed one toward him. I'm saying, he replied, that the Atlas board should learn the difference between a lantern and the person who lit it. For one wild second, I thought the truth might survive. Then Rowan laughed. Leora helped gather field notes, he said easily, with the generous tone people use when tossing crumbs to someone they expect to stay grateful. Celeste turned that raw material into something the board could believe in. Research matters, of course, but raw material is not vision. The audience relaxed. They had been offered a cleaner story, and people love clean stories when the truth asks work of them. I left before the shortlist was announced. Rain had started by the time I pushed through the side doors. Spring rain in Vesper City always smelled like hot concrete and tram lines. I walked without seeing anything. My phone rang again. Mina, then my mother, then Mina. Again, but I answered no one. At the avenue outside the school, the giant screen above the road switched to the live broadcast. Theo was on it now, looking directly at the camera, as if walls were suggestions. If I were choosing a collaborator for the future, he said, I would choose the girl whose work was used. Before it was understood, a horn screamed. Someone shouted. White light rushed at me from the left. When I opened my eyes again, the world smelled like chalk. I was sitting in room 4B at Halcyon Academy. Sunlight lay in bright bars across the floor. Mr. Halden was writing a chemistry equation on the board. Someone behind me was peeling an orange. Someone in front of me was tapping a pen against a ruler in a
rhythm I recognized with a shock, so violent it hurt.
It was the first Tuesday of senior year. I knew the light. I knew the room. I knew this exact morning because in my first life, I had spent half of it doodling Rowan's initials in the margin of my worksheet like a girl being privately ridiculous for free. A soft chime sounded inside my skull. Welcome back, Leora Ash. The voice was female, clear and deeply unimpressed by my panic. Temporal review complete. Regret threshold exceeded. Re-entry granted. I stared at the blackboard until the symbols blurred. Who are you? Second bell, the voice replied. A corrective interface. That explained absolutely nothing.
You
were hit by a tram, it added.
Fair.
A worksheet slid onto my desk. Leora, Mr. Halden said without turning around, if you intend to stare into the middle distance, all period at least balance this equation first. The class laughed. I looked down and saw the little heart I had already drawn around RV. On the page, horror shot through. Me, so quickly I flipped the sheet over. The boy beside me said, "That reaction won't improve. The chemistry." I froze. Theo Mercer sat at the next desk, sleeves rolled too, his elbows, pencil spinning between his fingers. Notebook already half full, although class had barely begun. In my first life, he had sat 3 rows away. Now he was close enough that I could see the graphite smudge on the side of his hand. He glanced at the paper I had flipped. "If it helps," he said. I did not see what was written. "There. You absolutely did. I saw your soul leave your body. Details were secondary." Then he pushed his spare pen toward me, a system in my head, Theo Mercer at my elbow, and the first day of senior year returned like nothing had happened. If fate expected me to handle that gracefully, fate had mistaken me for someone else.
Why is he sitting?
"Here," I asked the voice. "You selected the Applied Systems elective during enrollment." Different choices, different seat map.
I
Do not remember choosing that. Your memories ended under a tram. Another fare.
point.
I picked up Theo's pen. It was heavier than mine, perfectly balanced. On the board, the equation still glared at me, but beneath the panic, something else had begun to form, something cold and sharp and clean. I had been given back a year. Not to chase Rowan. Harder. Not to become prettier in someone else's spotlight. Not to learn how to shrink elegantly. A year to stop wasting myself.
Hey, Theo said.
Quietly, I blinked. "Your answer starts with oxygen," he said. "Watching you guess is physically painful." I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. It came out cracked and startled and much too loud. Theo looked vaguely alarmed, like he had kicked a
Machine and made it sing.
Across the room, Rowan turned in his seat. He looked exactly as he had in the life I lost, handsome, sure of his own gravity, polished enough that people mistook confidence for character. He smiled when our eyes met. This time, instead of melting, I felt nothing but distance. At lunch, he found me by the west staircase. Of course he did. In my first life, I had arranged my days around his convenience so completely I might as well have been a moon.
Leora, he said, falling into step beside me. You.
Vanished after chemistry. I went to math. Without waiting for me, I stopped on the landing and turned. Do I usually need permission to walk upstairs? His smile faltered. Did I do something? Hundreds of things, I thought. Some of them had not happened yet. So I asked a different question. If I'm smart but not graceful, I said, do I still count? He frowned. What kind of question is that? One with an answer? Leora, you know I value you. Value. As if I were useful furniture.
How much? I asked.
He exhaled, already irritated. Enough to spend my lunch break chasing your mood swings. There it was. The small cut wrapped his affection. In my first life, I would have apologized for bleeding. In this one, I stepped aside. I do not want your lunch break, I said. Or your answers. Or the version of me that works only when it looks up at you. His expression hardened. You are overreacting. No, I said. I'm arriving early. Then I walked up the stairs and left him there with his outrage in his beautiful face. Second bell chimed. Recorded. Decisive separation from harmful dependency. You sound smug, I told it. I am a system. Smugness is part of the build. The days after that were not miraculous. I had imagined time travel might make me instantly
formidable.
Instead, I learned that I was still
Myself?
I still got sleepy in afternoon classes, still froze. During timed physics problems, still hated public speaking, unless I pretended the audience had borrowed their faces from vegetables. The difference was that now I could see the lazy habits as they formed. Every time my mind drifted toward Rowan's schedule, Rowan's opinion, Rowan's likely reaction to my hair, or my notes, or my silence, I dragged it elsewhere, usually toward work, often toward Theo Mercer. Was not kind in the conventional sense. He did not say soft, empty things. He did not praise wrong answers to protect my pride. He did not pretend confusion was close enough to understanding. What he did relentlessly was take my mind.
Seriously.
On Thursday, he crossed out half my mechanics solution and said, "You are trying to impress the equation. It is not a sponsor. Tell it the truth." On Friday, he found me staring at a coding problem after class and sat down without asking. "You know the structure," he said. "You are hesitating because you do not trust yourself to be first. Maybe I'm hesitating because I'm wrong. You can be both. Choose one and move." When I finally solved it, something clicked through me like gears finding alignment. Second bell chimed. Recorded. Earned clarity. Retrieval available under stress. Meaning that when fear fogs your mind, I can replay the path of understanding, not the answer.
The
Architecture. That sounded less like cheating and more like mercy. With standards. By the second week of term, Theo and I had fallen into a rhythm that felt accidental and inevitable at once. We shared pencils. We traded insults disguised as quality control. He pushed astronomy articles across my desk when he thought a diagram might help my systems modeling. I reminded him to eat lunch before 3 and drink water before his bloodstream turned into dust. "You say that," he told me once, eyeing the bottle. I would shoved at him like hydration is immoral. achievement. It is when your organs are filing complaints. Mina, who considered herself a licensed observer of emotional nonsense, cornered me outside the library. One afternoon, you stopped orbiting Rowan, she said, which I support with fireworks. But now you and Theo look like two people in chapter 9 pretending chapter 12 is not coming. We are studying. That is all.
Why do you keep making that sound? Because one
Day you will hear yourself and apologize to me. I did. Not apologize, mostly because Rowan had started noticing that I no longer moved around him and it offended him more. Then the breakup itself, he began with jokes that could still be called jokes. If you wanted to stay lazy. A comment in debate club about how some people confuse intensity with depth. A question in the cafeteria about whether I was still good with field
Notes.
a laugh in the corridor when I changed electives. Strategic move. Average looks smarter in the right.
Room.
In my first life, I would have answered by trying harder to become acceptable. This time, I answered by becoming busy. I went to office hours. I joined the civic design lab. I started dressing for weather, comfort, and pockets instead of weather. Rowan might see me. I stopped asking how to remain admired and started asking what I actually wanted. It turned out I had
an answer.
I wanted to build systems ordinary people could trust. Not projects that looked beautiful and sponsor. Decks and died in the first storm. Not apps designed from glass towers by people who never had to choose between losing power and losing groceries. I wanted practical elegance flood alerts that arrived in time, transit maps people could actually read, street-level infrastructure built with communities instead of dropped onto them. The clarity of that desire frightened me because once you know what you want, excuses become harder to wear. In October, Halcyon announced the Vesper Urban Futures Challenge, a citywide competition for student teams proposing practical solutions to civic problems. The winning design would receive pilot funding and an interview with the Atlas Fellowship Board. Rowan immediately claimed he would lead Halcyon's flagship team. Celeste, who had transferred into our partner innovation program 2 weeks earlier, was at his side before the sentence finished leaving his mouth. I should have ignored them. Instead, I raised my
Hand.
I would like to pitch a separate proposal, I said. The room quieted. Rowan smiled without warmth. On your own? No, I said. With people who know how to do the work. They are named for. Half the class inhaled. Theo, from the back row, tilted his head as if I had finally become worth observing. Our team formed that same week. Mina for communication, June for hardware, Santa for environmental analysis, Theo for systems, architecture, and me for project lead and community design. The idea came from a market vendor near the river district who told us official flood alerts were always too late, too vague, or too dependent on electricity no one trusted to stay on. So we built a different question. What would warning look like if it were designed for the people who actually needed it? By the end of the week, we had a skeleton of lantern thread, a network of low power street level signal lanterns synced to rainfall and drainage, sensors coded in colors and sounds chosen with residents rather than imposed by distant offices, cheap to maintain, readable in rain, functional even. During partial outages, the old observatory annex became our headquarters. Because no one else liked the smell of solder dust and ambition at midnight, we built prototypes beside cracked star charts and retired telescope parts. Between tests, Theo would open the dome for a few minutes and let the cold sky spill over us. It reminds people the world is larger than the
Room, he said, when I asked why.
and if the room is the problem, then it reminds the room it is replaceable.
That.
Sentence lodged somewhere permanent inside me. The first time the prototype worked glowing amber, then blue, then pulsing according to rainfall. Threshold, Santa spent days refining. June whooped. Mina danced with a screwdriver and Theo leaned back against the bench with a smile so unguarded it felt private. Second bell chimed sharply. Recorded, collaborative, mastery. High retention, my thoughts felt brighter, quicker, as if all the work had finally found a place to settle and stay. I looked at Theo and understood with a little
Shock, how dangerous it is to meet someone who makes
you want to become more yourself instead of less. By November, our grades were posted. In my first life, I had floated in the safe, middle promising enough to remain useful, unfocused, enough never to become undeniable. Now I stood fourth in systems analysis, seventh in applied mathematics, and first in civic design.
Not. Legendary.
Real. Real enough that teachers started asking whether I had considered applying to North Shore University's School of Urban Systems. Real enough that Rowan stopped treating lantern thread as a hobby. One Tuesday, Celeste appeared in our lab doorway with flawless lipstick and a smile sharp enough to varnish over contempt. I came to see the famous lanterns, she said. Mina murmured. No, you came to see if truth had become
photogenic.
Celeste ignored her. She walked around the prototype table, studying the sensor casing, the color map, the community interview charts pinned to the board. It is practical, she said at last. It was the kind of compliment privileged people give when they can't improve something without ruining it. Rowan looked over our notes. You are still doing
Resident interviews. Yes.
That seems inefficient.
It seems respectful. He smiled. Same thing if you know what you are doing. Theo set down his screwdriver.
If you touch our notes, he said, I will invoice you.
For every intelligent thought they inspire.
They
Left soon after. 3 days later, a draft proposal from Rowan and Celeste's team landed in my inbox through an anonymous sender. It was not copied word for word. Rowan was never that careless. But they had lifted our patterns, our priorities. Even Santa's phrasing about signal trust in low-income districts, then wrapped them in sponsor language and arranged them around a rooftop beacon system no river resident had requested. I sat on my bedroom floor at midnight reading the document until anger turned cold. Then I opened a new folder. Timeline. Into it went every dated sketch, lab log code, version, voice memo, field interview, purchase, receipt, and message thread. Mina organized the communication records. Sana compiled environmental measurements. Jin pulled hardware invoices. Theo scanned his notebook pages, including the first one where he had written lantern thread, and beneath it in smaller letters, Leora's people first flood network. That line hit me harder than the theft. Not because he had credited me publicly. He always did, because he had written it in private for himself. Before any conflict required it, the next morning I filed a formal ethics complaint. The hearing took place in a conference room filled with chairs apparently designed by vindictive ghosts. Rowan arrived in immaculate uniform. Celeste brought a binder. I brought rage organized into tabs. You are making this bigger than it is, Rowan said before the board entered. Bigger than theft, ideas overlap. Time stamped. Interviews overlap. Community problems are public.
knowledge.
So are your methods, Theo said from the doorway. He had come straight from the machine shop sleeves, marked with graphite, and he handed me a flash.
Drive. Back up, he said.
In case anyone here mistakes, charm for evidence. The board ruled that Rowan and Celeste could remain in the competition only if they removed all material derived from our fieldwork and submitted an ethics
Disclosure.
It was not enough. It was, however, public.
That
Mattered. By December, Lantern Thread had become more than a school entry. We installed trial units in the River District. We taught residents how the signal patterns worked. We revised the alert tones after one elderly shopkeeper informed us that our first version sounded like a rich mosquito having a breakdown. At the same time, exams piled up. Applications opened and Atlas recommendations were due. I slept in pieces too small to count. Second bell warned me twice. Accumulation without rest reduces retention. I ignored it. The third warning arrived after I cried in a supply closet because a printer jammed. That evening, Theo found me on the observatory stairs, with my forehead against the railing.
bad.
Calibration, he asked. I am considering faking my death and becoming a lighthouse keeper.
Remote.
Windy?
Poor internet. Don't ruin it for me. He sat beside me in silence for a moment, then said, You are trying to outrun a humiliation that already
Happened.
I turned on him. You do not know what it felt like?
No, he said.
I know what it looks like when a person starts treating rest as betrayal. I looked away. They looked at him and saw the
Future, I whispered.
They looked at me and saw field notes.
And now, he asked.
I wanted to lie. I did not. Now I am afraid if I stop moving, I said, I will become easy to erase again. Theo was quiet long enough that I felt exposed down to the bone. Then he said, Leora, you are not the kind of work that disappears because someone else presents it badly. I made the dangerous mistake of laughing. It cracked into something closer to tears. Theo immediately pulled a folded handkerchief from his coat and offered it like a ceremonial weapon. You carry that around. My father says tissues are optimism. Handkerchiefs. Our strategy. He took me to the Mercer clock and watch repair shop. After that, as if food, chairs, and ticking machinery could restore a soul, the shop sat on East Canal between a tailor and a bakery that sold sesame buns until midnight. It smelled of brass, cedar drawers, and old patience. Clocks lined every wall, pocket watches, pendulums, enamel-faced travel clocks, moon-faced pieces with painted cobalt skies. Theo's father looked up from a magnifying lens and smiled at me as if he had been expecting me for years.
So, he said, you are the girl teaching my son that.
Dinner exists. Theo made a strangled sound.
Dad? Mr.
Mercer fed us buns and vanished into the back room. After assigning Theo 3 repairs, I sat on a stool and watched Theo open a brass mantle clock with hands so careful they made every movement look inevitable.
You are different here, I said.
How alarming.
You joke more.
The clocks can't report me.
I.
Rested my elbows on the counter.
Why clocks?
The screwdriver in his hand paused. My mother liked
Them, he said at last.
She used to say time was not cruel. People were cruel about time. They wasted it on the wrong gods and blamed the hours for leaving. The sentence settled among the ticking. She died when I was 13, he added. After that, everyone told me talent was my way. Out early offers, accelerated tracks, special programs. It sounded noble when I said no.
Really, I just was not ready to abandon the people.
Who knew her favorite song? You stayed, I said. I stayed. The honesty of it made my chest ache. Then he glanced up. Stop looking at me like I am a tragic violin concerto.
You are absolutely a
Tragic violin concerto. I repair clocks and drink bad coffee. At worst, I am concerning jazz. From the back room, Mr. Mercer shouted, if he is flirting, tell him his technique needs maintenance. Theo nearly dropped the screwdriver. Second bell chimed with indecent delight. Recorded. Emotional coherence increasing. Do not narrate my humiliation, I told it. It is one of my favorite
genres.
The Vesper Urban Futures Final took place at City Hall in a chamber full of planners, engineers, neighborhood representatives, and Atlas delegates. Rowan and Celeste presented first. Their proposal was gorgeous in the way expensive. Mistakes often are sleek renderings, dramatic animations, polished buzzwords, a rooftop beacon, network that looked magnificent in videos, and answered almost none of the questions asked by River residents. Who maintains it after installation? Asked Mrs. Dela Cruz, a shop owner from Dock Street. Our public-private partners, Rowan began. That means no one, she said flatly. Then it was our turn. I had always hated stages, but this time, Second Bell replayed the structure of every explanation I had practiced, and beside me stood a team that knew exactly what the work was. 4. Mina held the room with clear language. Sana had the data. June had the hardware ready. Theo looked at me the way people look at bridges. They have tested themselves, trusting them. So I began not with glamour, but with water. With Mrs. Ibrahim on Dock Street, who received an evacuation. Message 40 minutes after floodwater had already entered her kitchen, with the fish market boys who used motorcycle headlights as warning signals because the official alerts were trapped inside an app their grandparents could not read. With the fact that trust is not a decorative feature. It is a history between a system and the people forced to rely on it. When the questions came, they were not traps. They were practical, hard, worthy questions. We answered. All of them.
We won.
The city approved a pilot launch in Three River. Words. Atlas delegates requested individual interviews. Mina cried. June tried to spin Sana in a circle and failed. Because physics continues to be rude. Theo simply stood beside me with a smile hidden at one corner of his mouth, as if victory was something he preferred to hold quietly. I should have known the universe was not done testing me. The rumor campaign started that night. Anonymous student accounts, edited photos, invented timelines, claims that I had manipulated Theo into joining Lantern Thread because I specialized in attaching myself to brilliant boys, claims that our ethics complaint had been revenge for a failed relationship, claims that I had won by crying strategically in front of judges. I knew where it came from, even if Rowan was too careful to stain his own hands. Mina wanted war. Santa suggested legal notices. June proposed replacing every anonymous avatar on campus with pictures of mold. I wanted to disappear. That frightened me most, because retreat had once been my favorite instinct. Theo found me in the data lab after curfew, staring at a screen full of strangers calling me derivative, decorative, and opportunistic. He read enough over my shoulder to understand then. Closed the laptop. Hey, I snapped. I was collecting evidence.
You were bleeding on
Purpose.
I stood up too fast. People believe this. Some do. They are saying I can't do anything unless I am standing next to a man with better grades. His expression changed. Until then, I had seen him annoyed, amused, tired, and once personally offended by a badly designed screwdriver. I had never seen him angry on my behalf. Then let them try building what you built, he said. Let them try staying in rooms that never expected their voice and filling them anyway. Let them try earning trust without applause. His hands were clenched at his sides. And if anyone says again that your work exists, because of me, he added, I will make them explain in detail which part of my contribution involved becoming you. It was such a Theo sentence, precise, devastating, slightly unhinged, that I laughed in spite of myself. He exhaled. You do not have to read things written by people who could not build a spoon from instructions. At least a fork, I asked. Desert spoon, he said. I'm feeling generous. In
the end, I answered the rumors not with a public
breakdown and not with silence. I wrote an essay for the City Youth Journal about authorship, public service, and invisible labor. If your first instinct when seeing a capable girl succeed is to ask which boy must have carried her, I wrote, your imagination is not realism. It is laziness in formal wear. The piece spread farther than I expected. Teachers shared it. River District residents reposted it with photos of Lantern Thread's pilot units glowing at street corners. The school paper ran an editorial about collaborative credit. Rowan stopped smiling at me in hallways after that.
Good.
January brought the National Systems Relay
Invitation.
Each year, the relay selected student teams from around the country to solve live engineering and policy challenges in a televised final. Halcyon had not qualified in 5 years. This year, we did. Theo despised cameras on principle. They multiply. Incompetence, he muttered when we got the packet. That is not how lenses work. It is how producers work. Still, he said yes. So, did I? We spent the next month training in the observatory. Annex, timing handoffs, stress testing models, and practicing live briefings until Mina accused us of turning teamwork into suspiciously attractive choreography. One evening, while I was revising a policy brief, I looked up and caught Theo watching me.
What? I
Asked, "You think out loud with your eyebrows." I stared. "That," he said, pointing, "is what I mean. Why are you noticing my eyebrows in the middle of national prep?" He went still in the exact way people do when they reach the edge of an answer and decide not to jump. Then Jun burst through the door with takeaway noodles, and the moment dissolved into steam and complaints. Second bell chimed like an old gossip. I ignored it because cowardice is surprisingly.
Versatile.
The relay final was held at the Maritime Museum, beneath the skeleton of a whale long enough to make all of us feel briefly insect-sized. Teams from 12 cities stood under studio lights, while a host with weaponized teeth explained the rules. On the giant screen above us, our names flashed in
White.
Across the floor, I saw Rowan and Celeste, representing Oriat Preparatory, an elite academy that had apparently decided imported confidence counted as curriculum. The first round went badly. Not enough to eliminate us, but badly enough that my mind blinked during a live question about maintenance costs, and for 4 awful seconds I could see only lights, whale bones, and every old fear returning at once. Second bell fired. Retrieval available. Take it. Memory unfolded not the answer, but the architecture. The night Santa and I built the maintenance budget. From scratch. The marker in my hand, the confidence. From City Hall, the knowledge that I had already understood this once and could understand it again. My breath steadied. I answered. We advanced by 2 points. Backstage, I pressed my palms against the wall and laughed shakily. I think my organs are resigning. Theo handed me water. Unaccepted. By the final round, only 4 teams remained. The last challenge combined everything we feared. Design a rapid response network for neighborhoods. Cut off after a coastal storm, then defend its ethics before a panel that included engineers, city officials, and a journalist famous for reducing students to public stammering, while teams prepared, an equipment assistant rushed past our station and knocked over our calibration case. A lens hit the floor and shattered. I heard the crack and turned. Theo crouched automatically to gather the pieces. The assistant stammered apologies and kept moving, clearly under orders and nowhere near ready to admit whose orders they were. Across the stage, Rowan did not look at us. That told me enough.
Can you still run the model? I asked.
With approximations, Theo said,
How bad?
bad enough that you should prepare for improvisation. In another life, sabotage like that might have sent me straight into panic. This time, I reached for the emergency kit June had insisted we pack after too many late nights. Inside were backup sensors, spare batteries, tape, granola bars, and a folded note from Mina that read, "In case of disaster, flirt later, solve first." I barked out a laugh. Theo saw the note upside down and closed his eyes. She is a menace. She is our
Menace.
We rebuilt the configuration in 8 minutes.
Not.
Perfect. Enough. When our turn came, I stepped into the light and felt, for the first time in my life, no urge to become smaller. The presentation was not flawless. My voice roughened during the ethics section.
June.
Nearly tripped over a cable. One of Sana's overlays lagged by half a second, but the plan was alive, real, built by people who knew what failure cost when systems lied.
At the end.
The journalist leaned forward. Your proposal prioritizes community interpretation over centralized control, she said.
Admirable.
Also messy. Why trust the public with decisions experts usually? Guard, I thought of the ballroom, of being reduced to raw material, of river vendors who taught us which sounds meant urgency and which meant panic, of rebuilding myself, one clear act at a time. So I answered honestly, because expertise without humility becomes decoration, I said, and because people do not trust systems that only speak at them. The public is not the problem to be managed after design. They are the reason design exists at all. The silence after that belonged to me. We won the national systems relay by 1 point. Mina screamed. Jin dropped his badge. Santa cried openly. Theo stood beside me as if feeling something too large for language, then turned and, before cameras and judges and half the country watching, pulled me into his arms. Not a polite classmate hug, a real one. Warm, fierce, startled. I felt the shape of his heartbeat through his jacket. The audience roared. When he let go, his ears were red.
Sorry, he said.
That would be a ridiculous thing to apologize for. I managed. Results season arrived in a blur of pollen and terror. Teachers began speaking to me in the respectful, slightly startled tone usually reserved for natural.
Phenomena.
North Shore University requested a full interview. The Atlas Fellowship Board moved me to final consideration. The River District pilot expanded. Residents sent us photos of lantern thread glowing through heavy rain with messages like this one got. My auntie off Dock Street in time and the blue pulse. Works, but the amber could be friendlier. Meanwhile, final exams still crouched at the edge of spring and Theo still sat beside me correcting equations with ruthless tenderness. Don't use your old fear voice during the interview, he murmured one rainy Tuesday, sliding his annotated formulas toward me. The version of you who built lantern thread deserves better representation.
That sentence.
Nearly killed me harder than the tram. Atlas final interviews were held at the Crescent. Civic Center, a building shaped like someone had tried to turn optimism into architecture. Candidates waited in a room full of glass and nerves, while assistants moved with clipboards like minor
gods.
Theo stood in the courtyard below with the others. From Halcyon, technically because several finalists had come together actually because that morning he had looked at me and said, "You're absolutely not walking into that place alone." The board asked good questions. Why civic systems? Why now? What had failure taught me? How would I balance technical design with public consultation? What did institutions misunderstand about young people trying to solve public problems? I answered with the truth I had earned. I spoke about the seduction of polished visions, disconnected from reality, about learning the difference between being chosen and being worthy, about practical beauty, about systems that stay. Then an older board member with silver hair asked the question I feared most, "What changed you this year, Ms. Ash?" I looked through the glass wall toward the courtyard. Theo stood near the fountain, hands in his pockets, listening to Santa with full attention. Even at a distance, he looked like a person who had taught himself how to remain when leaving would have been easier, so I gave the only answer that mattered. I got tired, I said, of confusing being chosen with being worthy. When I came out, the sky had clouded
Over.
"Well," Mina demanded. I may have accidentally said something profound. "That is my girl." Theo waited until the others surged toward the tram stop. Then he fell into step beside me. "You did well," he said. "You did not hear it. I know your face after disaster."
That is not it.
I looked at him. "You always know more than is convenient." I stopped walking. More than convenient for who? I asked. For once, words did not come easily for him.
For
Me? He said.
The world narrowed to fountain water, spring wind, and the ridiculous fact that no amount of rebuilding prepares you for one honest sentence from the right person. "I have been trying not to say anything before your interviews were over," he said, "or before finals, or during finals, or while you were carrying 14 responsibilities and one developing hero complex. I do not have a hero complex. You tried to solve a city before breakfast.
That.
Feels circumstantial." He laughed once, then turned.
Serious.
"Leora," he said, "I liked you before it was useful. Before Lantern Thread, before rankings changed, before you started looking at yourself like someone worth arguing for." I covered my mouth because otherwise I might have made a noise loud enough to alert migratory birds. "In September," he said, softer now, "you laughed in chemistry like you had surprised yourself. I think that was it for me. Then you kept becoming more yourself, which was extremely inconsiderate." I lowered my hand. "I think I started falling for you the night you said the room was replaceable." He blinked. That was a strange sentence to seduce someone with. "You repair clocks and insult people into self respect," I said. "Your methods were always niche." His smile then was genuinely dangerous.
Can I kiss you?
He asked. "Yes," I said, immediately with all the composure of a collapsing bookshelf. "So he did, under spring rain beside a fountain, hours after an interview that might determine my future, Theo." Mercer kissed me like time had finally decided to be generous. Second bell chimed almost tenderly. Recorded. "Alignment. You are impossible," I told it. And yet, it replied. "Here we are." Exam results released. First, I placed second in the graduating class. Theo placed first, surprising no one except perhaps gravity. Rowan placed third. 3 days later, while I was helping Mr. Mercer catalog antique pocket watches, the Atlas board called. The silver-haired woman said, "Ms. Ash, I hope you still believe practical beauty deserves funding." For one horrifying second, I thought that was how rejections opened. Then she continued, "Because we would be honored to support your work at North Shore as this year's Atlas Civic Scholar."
The.
Stool vanished from under me. Theo caught my elbow before I collided with a display of 19th century travel clocks, which would have been a historically embarrassing reaction to good news.
Mr.
Mercer looked up from the ledger. Is that face joy or tax fraud? Theo took the phone, confirmed the details with maddening competence, then looked at me for half a second and lifted me clean off the ground. North Shore sent admission papers in blue. The city approved Lantern Thread's full pilot expansion. The Youth Journal offered me a recurring column on
Civic design.
the life I had once wanted in scraps. Began arriving as structure. Theo accepted Orion Institute's dual program in astrophysics and systems engineering, 2 hours away. By train? 2 hours, I said when he told me. That is practically medieval. It is one train and a bad station sandwich. I reject the sandwich on moral grounds. We will survive. We were sitting on the roof of the observatory annex after graduation, robes abandoned. Beside us, families and camera flashes far below. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "In another
universe," I said, "I probably led a much worse boy."
ruined me for years." Theo was quiet long enough that I looked up. Then he said, "I know." I stared. Second bell chimed. Very softly, Theo added, "You are not the only one who heard a voice after the storm." The world stopped. My version was not called Second Bell, he said. Mine was more of a spectator interface.
No rewinds. No earned clarity ledger.
Just observation permissions, and apparently one catastrophic loophole involving emotional
Interference.
You knew. Not at first. But the day you laughed in chemistry something flagged a divergence. After that, he shrugged. Slightly. I stopped caring whether it was rational. I punched his arm. Not hard. Hard enough to honor.
History.
You let me spend a year being confused?
Alone. I was told not to destabilize your corrective
Path.
You obeyed. I ignored several guidelines. He said, I sat next to you for an entire year. Annoyingly, that was a fair point. Who built them? I demanded. Theo smiled. Maybe one day we will. Deserve that answer. Second Bell said nothing.
Coward, I thought. Strategic silence? It replied.
Graduation ended in flowers, camera flashes, and my mother crying hard enough to force my father to remove his glasses. Mina announced she expected front row access to every major event in my future, including conferences, weddings, and Nobel-adjacent scandals. June gave Theo a toolkit engraved, try not to fix the universe all at once. Santa received 3 internships and pretended to be surprised by all of
Them.
Rowan crossed the stage, collected his honors, and left before sunset. I did not stop him. Not every ending requires witness. Some only require that you no longer follow. The night before my train to North Shore, I walked to East Canal one last time. The clock shop was closed. A note in the window said, customers should return Tuesday unless time itself was broken, in which case they should knock harder. Theo was waiting on the canal bridge with a small, wrapped box under one arm. Inside it was a silver pocket watch restored to a soft shine. On the inside lid, engraved in impossibly fine lettering, were the words, for the girl who learned to measure her own light. I looked up so fast the canal blurred. It belonged to my mother, he said. It stopped for years. I thought maybe it was waiting for someone too. Stubborn to mistake time for permission. Tears arrived before dignity. That is outrageously romantic, I informed him.
I
Had to compete with public infrastructure. I laughed and cried at once, stepped into him, and wrapped my arms around his waist. His chin rested lightly against my hair. North Shore, he said, is going to have no idea what to do with you. That is all right, I said.
I
Know what to do with me now. The next morning, Vesper Station smelled like coffee, diesel, and unspoken panic. My parents hugged me 14 times. Mina gave me a notebook labeled use this for history, not boys. Jun handed me a portable toolkit. Santa promised to audit my statistics notes for crimes. Mr. Mercer pressed a bag of sesame buns into my hands and said clocks in dorms were often lies, but this one was edible. Theo walked with me to the train doors. You will, right? I asked. I will visit. That was not the question. I will do both. The platform announcement sounded. People moved. Wheels rolled. Somewhere a child dropped a coin and informed heaven of the injustice. Theo took my hand. I loved you in the year you almost lost, he said. Quietly. I'm not worried about the years you will win. There are sentences that become architecture inside.
You
I carried that one onto the train. As Vesper City slid away beyond the window, I opened the pocket watch. Its hands moved smoothly. Tick by. Tick. Not cruel. Not kind. Only faithful. Second bell chimed once, then settled into a silence. So complete it felt like a bow. Corrective cycle complete, it said. You no longer need a voice to tell you when your life belongs to.
You
I looked at my reflection in the glass, older than I had been, younger than I would become, not dazzling. In the way ballrooms demand, but bright in a way storms cannot bargain with. Ahead, a new city waited. I touched the watch in my palm, then Mina's
notebook. Then the fellowship papers tucked into my
bag beside diagrams for Lantern Thread's next phase. For the first time, the future did not look like a stage where someone else might name me. It looked like a place with work to do. So I turned to the first blank page of the notebook and wrote the only beginning that felt honest.
My
Name is Leora Ash. I build things that stay,